Hello students, this is Mrs. Jillian here, and in this video we are going to look at rules number 1, 2, and 3 for conjugating verbs in the simple past. So if we look at the screen, you can see this triangle over here, and you might remember this from when we were learning the rules of the simple present, right? And in fact, before we look at the simple past, I think that it's important for us to review the simple present because that will help us learn the simple past. Okay, so when we're in the simple present and we want to conjugate a verb, let's say we have the verb to eat. Okay, for pronouns like I, you, what else? They, we just take the verb and we don't make any changes. So it becomes I eat, you eat, they eat, we eat, right? However, if we have the pronoun he, she, or it, that is when we are going to use one of the rules to conjugate the verb. Okay, so let's start with rule number 1. If you remember, rule number 1 is for any verb that ends with the letter E, or if it ends with a consonant. So an example of a verb that ends with the letter E would be like the verb to like. And a verb that ends with a consonant, let's use the verb to drink. Right? So for rule number 1, all we do is add one letter, which is the letter S, which would make the verb to like, likes, right? So it likes. Or if we want to say she drinks, we would add the S there. Okay, so that is for any verb that ends with the letter E or with a consonant, right? Like the verb to like or the verb to drink. So that's rule number 1. Rule number 2, it's for any verb that ends with a snaky sound. And by snaky sound, I mean S, X, Z, SH, CH, and don't forget the letter O. The snake's head reminds us of the letter O. Okay, and so any verb that ends with one of these letters, we will add ES, right? So for example, to go, like I go to the park, would become goes, right? Finally, for rule number 3, this is any verb that ends with a consonant followed by the letter Y. Okay, let's use the verb to fly as an example, right? So we see that there's a consonant and it's followed by the letter Y. And for rule number 3, we remember that the Y becomes I and we add ES. So the verb to fly would become flies, like the bird flies in the sky. Okay, so that's the simple present, and now that we've reviewed that, we can go into the simple past. So let's look at the simple past together. Let me write that up at the top. Now, if you remember, in the simple present, we only use these rules for he, she, and it, correct? For I, you, they, and we, the verb stays the same. However, in the simple past, okay, and by the past, we're talking about that anything that happened before. So if it happened yesterday, or if it happened last week, or last month, okay? That's all things that happened in the past. We use these rules for all the pronouns, okay? So all the pronouns as in I, you, he, she, it, and then the plural, we, you, and they. So the 3 rules that we're going to go over together right now, that is for all pronouns, and they all have the same ending. Okay, so we're going to start with rule number 1, and rule number 1 is extremely easy. We are adding one letter at the end, and that is the letter D. Okay, so if you remember again, let's look back at the simple present. In each of our rules, we were adding the letter S, right? And then sometimes we add ES or IES, but all of them have the letter S. Similarly, in the past, all of our rules are going to end with a letter D. Okay? So, for rule number 1, this is any verb that ends with the letter E. Simple as that. Okay? Here's some examples. To make. Actually, we can't use make because that's an irregular verb. So let's erase that. Let's use to like. Or how about to love? Okay, both of these verbs end with the letter E, and all you need to do to put it into the simple past is to add the letter D at the end. Simple as that. Okay, now for rule number 2, we're going to be adding 2 letters at the end. We're going to add E and the letter D. Remember what I said, every single rule for the simple past will end with the letter D. And this rule is for any verb that ends with a consonant. Okay, so for example, the verb to wait. Okay, like to wait for the bus. Because T is a consonant, we are going to add ED. So wait becomes waited. Yesterday I waited for the bus. Okay, ED. The last rule we're going to look at today is for any verb that ends with a consonant plus the letter Y. Okay, and let's use to cry. Okay, so for any verb, as I said, that ends with a consonant followed by the letter Y, we're going to add, well actually, we will turn the Y into I, and we will add ED. Okay, again, ending with the D. Okay, so the verb to cry becomes cried. Okay, IED. Right, so those are the 3 rules for the simple past. There are more rules that we're not going to go over today. And in fact, one of the hardest things about the simple past is that there are a lot of irregular verbs. Okay, so by irregular verbs, I mean that those verbs do not use the rules that we just talked about. That's something we're going to go over at a later time, but for now, I want you to focus on practicing these first 3 rules. Okay, so remember, rule number 1, we add the letter D to any verb that ends with the letter E. Okay, rule number 2, it's adding ED to any verb that ends with a consonant. And finally, rule number 3, which is changing the Y to I and then adding ED to any verb with a consonant followed by the letter Y. Okay, so practice, 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 and I will see you in the next video. Bye!